A man who fixed a stranger's wheelchair missed the most important interview of his life. He had no connections, no degree, nothing but a toolbox, a daughter counting on him, and a belief that doing the right thing still meant something. The woman in that wheelchair? She happened to be the CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies in the country. What happened next would flip everything he thought he knew about luck, worth, and what a single decision on a sidewalk could cost, or give, a person. If this story gets to you, hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Nathan Cole had set it, which told him everything he needed to know about how well he'd slept. He lay still for a moment on the narrow mattress, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like the state of Texas if you tilted your head and squinted. He'd been staring at that stain for 2 years, ever since he and Lily moved into this apartment after the divorce. 2 years of 5:47 a.m. mornings, and not enough sleep, and the particular low-grade anxiety of a man who knew the math of his own life didn't quite add up. He sat up, rubbed his face with both hands, and reached for his phone. The email from Vertex Mobility Technologies was still there. He'd read it 6 times before bed, then twice more when he woke up at 2 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. We'd like to invite you for an in-person interview on Thursday, October 12th at 9 a.m. He'd sent in the application on something close to a dare to himself, one of those late-night moments when a man is tired enough to do the thing he'd normally talk himself out of. He hadn't expected a callback. He damn sure hadn't expected this. Vertex Mobility Technologies. Even saying the name felt like touching something he wasn't supposed to touch. He set the phone on the nightstand and got moving. The apartment was small enough that he could hear Lily breathing through the thin wall between their bedrooms. He moved quietly, which he'd gotten good at over the years, navigating the dark without turning on lights, setting the coffee maker on a timer the night before so it wouldn't beep and wake her. These were the small skills of single fatherhood that nobody warned you about and nobody gave you credit for. He stood over the coffee maker and watched it drip and tried to calm the thing happening in his chest. It wasn't quite excitement. It wasn't quite dread. It was something in between, the feeling of standing at the edge of something without being able to see what was on the other side. He'd been a mechanic for 11 years, started working on cars when he was 19, right out of high school, because there was a shop 2 miles from his mother's house that was hiring, and he needed money, and his hands were good, and he was patient. Those things turned out to matter more than he expected, the patience especially. Cars were not complicated if you were willing to slow down and actually listen to them. Most guys wanted to diagnose fast and fix fast and move to the next one. Nathan had learned early that the ones who did that missed things. Small things that became big things 2 months later, usually right after the car left the lot. He'd gotten decent at his job, then good, then genuinely skilled in the way that drew other mechanics over to watch when he was working through something difficult, because they knew he was going to find it eventually and they wanted to see how. But decent wages for a good mechanic in Austin, Texas were not the same thing as comfortable, especially not with a daughter in elementary school and rent going up every year and the cost of everything climbing like it had someplace to be. He sat down at the kitchen table with his coffee and opened his laptop. His interview outfit, a dark blue button-down shirt and the black slacks he'd bought last year for his buddy Marco's wedding, was already hanging on the back of the bathroom door. He'd pressed them twice, which was once more than necessary because he needed something to do with his nerves. He pulled up the Vertex Mobility website again. He'd spent most of the week on it, reading everything he could find. The company developed advanced mobility engineering, primarily for vehicles, but increasingly for personal mobility devices. Wheelchairs, exo-assisted movement systems, adaptive transportation. They had something like 400 employees, offices in Austin and Denver and Seattle, and a reputation in the engineering world that was, based on everything Nathan had read, somewhere between respected and genuinely remarkable. Their CEO was a 27-year-old named Sophia Bennett. There were 2 photos of her on the website. In one, she was at a podium at some conference, hands gripping the sides of it, looking like she was halfway through saying something important. In the other, she was in a boardroom, sitting at the head of a long table, and you could see from the angle of her torso and the way her hands were positioned that she was in a wheelchair. Nathan had looked at that photo for a long time the first time he saw it, not because of the wheelchair, but because of her expression, calm, measured, completely certain of herself in a way that looked less like confidence and more like just knowing the truth of a thing. He'd read about the accident, too. It was mentioned briefly in a profile piece from 2 years ago, before she took over the company. A car crash when she was 19. Spinal injury. She'd been in the wheelchair since. The article mentioned it in a single paragraph and then moved on, which Nathan suspected was exactly how she wanted it handled. He closed the laptop at 6:30 and went to wake Lily up for school. His daughter was 8 years old and the most exhausting person Nathan had ever known in his life, which he meant entirely as a compliment. She was already awake when he opened the door, lying on her back with her arms folded across her chest like a small, irritated pharaoh, staring at the ceiling with the particular expression she made when something was bothering her and she was deciding whether to say it or let it sit. "You're up early," Nathan said. "You were loud." "I was quiet." "You made the floor creak." He came in and sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress tilting under his weight. Lily had his dark eyes and her mother's sharp jaw, and a way of looking at him that he sometimes found mildly destabilizing, like she saw more than she let on. "I have that interview today," he said. "I know." She said it like she'd known for weeks, which she had. He'd told her the day the email came. She'd said cool and then asked if they could have tacos for dinner, which was about the level of reaction he expected from an 8-year-old. "If it goes well," he started. "I know, Dad." "I'm just saying." "I know." She sat up. Her hair was tangled and she had a crease on her cheek from the pillow. "You've explained it." "Yeah." He reached over and smoothed down a section of her hair, which she let him do for approximately 2 seconds before pulling her head away. "Okay, let's get you fed." She followed him to the kitchen in her socks and ate cereal while he stood at the counter and drank the rest of his coffee. They didn't talk much. They were good at that, the two of them, comfortable in the silence of a weekday morning. Nathan watched her eat and thought about how much she'd grown in the last year, how her face was changing, how she looked less like a little kid and more like a person every time he looked at her for more than a few seconds. He thought about what it would actually mean, in practical terms, if today went the way he needed it to go. The position at Vertex wasn't just a better job. It was a different category of life. He'd seen the salary range when he looked up similar roles during his research, more than twice what he was making now. Real benefits. A 401k stability that didn't feel like it was always one unexpected bill away from becoming instability. He tried not to think about what it would mean if it didn't work out. He dropped Lily at school at 7:45, walked her to the entrance the way he did every morning, and watched her go through the doors without looking back, the way she always did. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to, then got back in his truck. The interview was at 9. Vertex's headquarters were in the Domain District, about 20 minutes north of here in light traffic. He had time. He pulled out of the school lot and headed north on Lamar. The morning was clear and dry, the sky that particular shade of October blue that made Austin look better than it deserved. He had the windows down and the radio off, which was how he drove when he was thinking. He ran through the interview prep in his head, the questions he'd practiced, the projects he'd pull from, the transmission rebuild on the Silverado last spring, the electrical diagnostic work he'd started doing after teaching himself on YouTube, and a borrowed set of manuals. The way he'd learned to explain technical things in plain language because most of his customers didn't want the engineering. They just wanted to understand what was wrong and whether it could be fixed. He'd written out answers to 37 potential interview questions on a yellow legal pad over the last 4 days. He'd rehearsed them in the bathroom mirror. He'd asked Marco to mock interview him over the phone, which Marco had done without complaining, which was one of the reasons Nathan had been friends with him for 15 years. He turned right on 38th, and the traffic thickened slightly. He checked his watch. 8:02. Still fine. He was coming up on a section of sidewalk near a bus stop when he saw her. A woman in a motorized wheelchair, positioned at the edge of where the sidewalk met the curb. She was trying to cross the street, but the curb cut. The sloped section that allowed wheelchair users to transition from sidewalk to road was broken. Not just cracked, partially collapsed, the concrete tilted at an angle that had caught the front left wheel of her chair. The chair was hung up, nose down, and she was leaning forward trying to back out of it, but the motor was whirring against the stuck wheel without traction, and the thing wasn't moving. Nathan saw it all in about 2 seconds as he drove past. He drove another 30 feet and then pulled over. He sat there with his hands on the wheel for a moment. The dashboard clock said 8:04. The interview was at 9. Vertex was 15, maybe 20 minutes from here in current traffic. He had time. He turned off the engine and got out. Utat. The woman was in her mid to late 20s. Dark hair pulled back, dressed like she was headed somewhere professional. A charcoal blazer over a white blouse. She had a bag in her lap and was holding her phone, and when Nathan came around the front of his truck and walked toward her, she looked up with an expression that was somewhere between annoyed and carefully composed. "Chair's stuck," she said. "It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request for help exactly. It was just a statement of fact, delivered with the flatness of someone who had said similar things in similar situations more times than they found interesting." "I can see that," Nathan said. He crouched down beside the front left wheel without asking permission to examine it. Not rude, just focused, the way he went at any mechanical problem. The concrete had buckled, and the front edge of the footplate had dropped into the gap. The wheel itself was fine, but the geometry was all wrong. The motor was pulling in the direction that was making it worse. "If you ease off the throttle," he said, I know how my own chair works," she said. He looked up at her. "Okay." She looked back at him. There was a beat. "I've already tried," she said, a little less evenly. "Right." He stood up and looked at the chair's frame, running a quick assessment the way he'd been trained. Except he hadn't been trained. Not for this. But the principles were the same as always. Understand the load, find the binding point, remove the stress. The front wheel's caught at an angle. If we can tilt the chair back slightly, take weight off the front, it should free up. She was quiet for a moment. "You can't tilt this chair from the outside without destabilizing me. I'm not going to tilt it from outside. I need you to activate the recline function, if you have one, and I can guide the wheel while you back out." She looked at him for a moment like she was deciding something. Then she said, "This chair doesn't have a recline function. It's not that model." "Okay." He thought for a second. "Does it have a manual override?" Something shifted in her expression, barely. "Under the left armrest, red switch." Nathan went to it, found the switch, and felt the resistance in the system disengage. The chair went passive. He got his hands under the frame, not grabbing the wheels, just supporting the undercarriage, and said, "Try backing up now, slow." She worked the joystick. The wheel shifted. It was close, but not quite. "A little more tilt," she said. He adjusted his grip, lifting slightly, and she backed the chair and the front wheel came clear of the gap, and the chair rolled backward onto flat concrete, and Nathan straightened up, and the whole thing had taken maybe 4 minutes. She brought the chair to a stop and switched the manual override back. The motor hummed back to life. She sat for a moment, hands in her lap. "Thank you," she said. The flatness was still there, but it had a different quality now. More measured than guarded. "No problem." Nathan was already noticing that the concrete damage was part of a larger issue, a section of the curb cut that looked like it had been bad for a while. He crouched and looked at the angle of the brake. It wasn't going to fix itself, and the next person who came through here in a chair might not have someone stop. He walked back to his truck. He had a toolbox in the truck bed. It was there the way a second heartbeat is there, constant, unremarkable, something he would have felt the absence of immediately. He opened it and stood for a moment looking at what he had. He could do a temporary repair. Not a real one. That would need city maintenance and new concrete, but something that would make the transition survivable until it got properly fixed. He had bonding compound, which he used for quick seals on cracked engine casings. He had a small pry bar and a rubber mallet. He had wedge shims he'd been carrying around for 6 months and never used. He looked at his watch. 8:09. He had time. He went back to the curb and got to work. The woman hadn't left. She was parked on the sidewalk a few feet back, watching him. She didn't say anything while he worked. He didn't feel the need to explain himself. He levered up the broken section of concrete with the pry bar, which was harder than it looked because the concrete was heavier than he expected, and his angle was bad. He got it adjusted, shimmed it, packed bonding compound into the gap, and used a flat piece of metal from the toolbox as a temporary bridge plate, bolting it down with anchor screws into the concrete on either side. It wasn't pretty, but it was stable. He stood up and wiped his hands on a shop rag from his back pocket, then stepped onto the repair to test it with his weight. It held. He did it again, harder, still held. He looked up, and the woman was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. That'll hold until the city gets out here, he said. Should give you a clean exit and entry both ways. She came forward in the chair and rolled over his repair, slowly, once, then backed up and came over it again. The transition was smooth. She stopped the chair. You do this for a living? I'm a mechanic, he said. Mostly cars. She nodded slowly. She looked at the repair again, then at him. You're going to be late somewhere, she said. It wasn't a question either. He'd been focused enough that he hadn't thought about it, but now he checked his watch and the time hit him like cold water, 8:34. He looked at his truck, then back at the road north, and did the math. It was possible. Maybe. If traffic stayed light and he didn't catch the construction on 183 and he drove the way he never drove. I'll manage, he said. He gathered his tools back into the box, loaded it into the bed, and got in the truck. He drove north and the traffic did not cooperate. There was a fender bender on the access road near 183 that backed everything up by 12 minutes. He sat in it with his hands on the wheel and his jaw set and watched the clock and thought about the yellow legal pad on his kitchen table with the 37 questions and their answers. He tried calling Vertex's main line to let them know he was running behind. He got a recorded menu, went through 3 options, and was put on hold. He left it on hold on the passenger seat while he inched through traffic and the hold music played, and at 9:07 the line disconnected. By the time he pulled into the parking garage at Vertex's building, it was 9:21. He sat in the truck for a moment, 21 minutes late. He'd been rehearsing for 5 days. He'd pressed the shirt twice. He'd asked Marco to run him through practice questions on the phone. He thought about what he should do. Then he went in anyway because sitting in the parking garage wasn't going to improve anything. The lobby of Vertex Mobility Technologies was not what Nathan had expected, which was mostly that he hadn't known what to expect and had defaulted to imagining something cold and corporate. But the space was open and warm, the floors polished concrete, the walls lined with displays showing engineering schematics and product renderings, and what looked like early prototypes behind glass cases. A lot of the displays were mobility-related, wheelchairs and personal transport devices and vehicle adaptation systems. And there was something about seeing it all together that made the company's purpose feel real in a way that websites didn't quite convey. A young woman at the front desk looked up when he came in. Nathan Cole, he said. I had a 9 o'clock interview. I'm aware I'm late. She typed something, looked at her screen, and her expression shifted slightly. Let me check with HR, she said. One moment. He stood at the desk and waited. The lobby was quiet. A few people moved through in the background. A man in a hard hat carrying a tablet. 2 women in conversation who didn't look up. Normal company morning. He felt conspicuous in his pressed blue shirt and slacks. The receptionist came back on the phone and had a brief conversation he couldn't hear, then hung up and looked at him with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they're not fully responsible for. I'm sorry, Mr. Cole, the interview panel has moved on. We filled the morning schedule. She paused. If you'd like, I can pass your information along for future openings. He nodded. Yeah, sure. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Can I leave my card? She gave him an envelope and he wrote his number on the back of a business card. The mechanic shop cards, not a personal card, because he didn't have personal cards, and left it with her and walked back out through the glass doors. The October sun was full out now, sharp and direct, and he stood in the parking lot for a moment with his hands in his pockets, and the particular feeling of a man who knew he'd done the right thing and was trying to figure out how to carry the cost of it. He was not someone who felt sorry for himself easily. It wasn't in his character, and he'd trained it out of what little was there after Lily was born. Because a man who spends his energy on self-pity is spending it on the wrong thing. But he stood there for a minute and he let himself feel it, the way he'd let himself feel his knee when he'd taken a bad hit playing pickup basketball with Marco 2 years ago. Acknowledge it, understand it, then get moving. He got back in the truck. He called the shop and told his manager he'd be in by 11. He drove home to change out of the interview clothes because he wasn't going to wear a pressed shirt under a car for 8 hours. In the apartment, he took off the blue button-down and hung it back on the bathroom door hook and stood in front of the mirror in his undershirt for a moment. The water stain on the bedroom ceiling was visible through the open door. He thought about the woman in the wheelchair and the way she'd rolled over the repair twice, testing it. The clean pass both directions. He thought, at least that part worked. Then he put on his work clothes and went to go fix other people's cars. He picked Lily up from school at 3:15. She got in the truck and buckled her seatbelt and said, "How'd it go?" "I was late," he said. "They gave the slot to someone else." She was quiet for a moment. "That's bad." "Yeah." "Did you mess up?" "No. I stopped to help someone and traffic was worse than I thought." She looked at him. "Who'd you help?" "Woman in a wheelchair. Her chair was stuck." Lily considered this with the seriousness she applied to most things. She had her mother's way of not rushing past information. "Did you fix it?" "Fix the chair and patch the curb. Temporary fix, but it'll hold." "Cool." She turned to look out the window. After a moment, "That sucks, though. About the interview." "It does," he agreed. They drove for a while in silence. He thought about calling Marco tonight, maybe looking at what other companies were hiring. He thought about his truck payment due in 11 days and the fact that Lily needed new winter shoes and the math of a life that was always one thing short. "Can we still have tacos?" Lily asked. "Yeah," he said. "We can still have tacos." He was in the middle of a brake rotor replacement the next morning when his phone rang. Unknown number, Austin area code. He ignored it. It rang again 10 minutes later. Same number. He set down the caliper, wiped his hands, and picked up. "Is this Nathan Cole?" A woman's voice. Professional, clipped, not unfriendly. "Yeah." "This is Amanda Reyes, Executive Coordinator at Vertex Mobility Technologies. Ms. Bennett would like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Are you available to come in today?" Nathan stood very still under the car. There was grease on his forearm, and the radio in the shop was playing something with too much bass. He tried to parse what he'd just heard. "Ms. Bennett," he said. The CEO, yes." He looked at his watch. "I can be there by noon." "Wonderful. We'll have a visitor badge ready at the front desk." A brief pause. "Bring your tools if you have them." "Bring my... what?" "Miss Bennett's words, not mine," the woman said, with a slight tone that suggested she found this mildly unusual herself. "We'll see you at noon, Mr. Cole. Lobopte." He told his manager he needed the afternoon and drove home to change back into the blue shirt, which was still on the bathroom door hook where he'd left it the day before. He stood in front of the mirror and straightened the collar. He looked at himself. The mechanic's hands, the faint grease line under his left thumbnail that never fully came out regardless of how hard he scrubbed. The face of a man who'd been up early and worked late for 11 years. He didn't know what was waiting for him at Vertex. He didn't know why the CEO wanted to see him or what bring your tools was supposed to mean. He didn't know if this was good news or some kind of meeting he'd have no context for. He drove north again. The receptionist from yesterday recognized him and had a badge ready before he finished saying his name. He was taken through a different route this time, not the lobby display area, but a hallway behind it, where the walls changed from polished surfaces to dry erase boards and printed schematics, and the general organized chaos of a working engineering operation. Amanda Reyes was waiting for him at a set of glass doors. She was in her 40s, brisk, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a tablet under her arm. She shook his hand, assessed him in one fast look, and led him without preamble to an elevator. "Miss Bennett apologizes for the unusual circumstances," she said as the doors closed. "She wanted me to tell you she watched the security footage." Nathan looked at her. "Security footage?" "From the street camera near the corner where you stopped yesterday." She wasn't looking at him, just watching the floor numbers. "The city uses a shared camera grid. We have access to a portion of it for facility security purposes." A pause. She watched it twice. The elevator opened onto the 4th floor. Through another glass partition, Nathan could see a large open workspace. Long tables, whiteboards covered in diagrams, workbenches with components laid out in orderly grids. The kind of space where things got built. At the far end, near a bank of windows, a woman in a wheelchair was positioned at a large drafting table, talking to a man who was holding a tablet and gesturing at something on the screen. She was leaning back slightly, listening, with the stillness of someone who was absorbing information rather than waiting for their turn to speak. Amanda led Nathan toward her. The man with the tablet glanced up, noted Nathan's arrival, said something brief to the woman, and moved off to the side. Sophia Bennett turned the chair. Nathan recognized her from the website photos, but photos hadn't gotten her right. She was younger looking in person. Something about the set of her jaw that was more uncertain than the composed boardroom image had suggested. Her eyes moved over him quickly, the same fast assessment Amanda had done, but with something additional in it that Nathan couldn't immediately name. "Mr. Cole," she said. She didn't offer a hand. He'd learn later that this wasn't standoffishness, just her default positioning at the chair, and so he just nodded. "Sophia Bennett." "I figured," he said. The corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile, but not quite. "Sit down." He sat in the chair across from her drafting table. The workspace stretched around them. People were working at various stations but not paying attention to them, or doing a good job of appearing not to. She let the silence run for a moment, which Nathan recognized as a deliberate thing, a test of some kind, and so he sat with it instead of filling it. "You were on your way here," she said finally. "For the interview?" "Yes." "And you stopped?" "Yes." "And fixed the curb?" "Temporarily. The city still needs to—" "I know, I reported it yesterday afternoon." She paused. "I watched you work. From the footage." She looked at him in that direct way. "That wasn't a simple fix, the way you assessed the problem, the tools you used. You were working without context. You didn't know that chair model. You'd never seen that type of damage. And you diagnosed it correctly and solved it in a way that held." Another pause. "You were also late to the most important interview of your year." "Yeah." He didn't have a better answer than that. "Did you think about that while you were fixing it?" "I thought I had time. I was wrong about the traffic." "But you kept working." He looked at her. "I don't know how to half fix a thing," he said. "Once I saw it needed to be done, I was going to do it right or not at all." Sophia Bennett looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached to the side of her drafting table and turned it so he could see what was on it. It was a schematic. A wheelchair system, but unlike anything he'd seen in the lobby displays, more complex, with components he didn't immediately recognize. The drawing had the layered quality of something that had been worked on over time, additions and revisions in different inks. "This is what we're building," she said. "Or trying to build. We've been trying to build it for 14 months. She let him look at it for a moment. "Tell me what you see." Nathan leaned forward in the chair. He looked at the schematic the way he looked at an engine diagram, not trying to understand every system at once, just following the logic of the thing, tracing the load paths, looking for where the complexity was concentrating. "The drive system's here," he said, pointing without touching. "But it looks like there's a secondary assist mechanism. There and there." He traced a path. "Is that for elevation change? Like curb transitions?" "Exactly that," she said. Her voice had shifted, not warmer exactly, but more direct. "We've been struggling with the transition mechanics. Current solutions are either too heavy, too slow, or too mechanically complex to be reliable in real-world conditions." She looked at the schematic. "We need someone who understands real-world conditions, not lab conditions, not theoretical load models, someone who's worked on things that actually break in actual environments." Nathan looked at her. "I'm a car mechanic." "I know what you are." She said it without heat, just steadiness. "I also know what I saw on that footage. You assessed an unfamiliar system, identified the correct intervention, executed it cleanly under time pressure, and made a repair that's held through 2 days of use." She turned the chair slightly, a small adjustment. "My engineers are excellent. They're well-trained and technically precise, and most of them have never repaired something by the side of a road in their lives." A pause. "I want to offer you a position on this project." The workspace noise continued around them. Someone at a workbench dropped something metal and it rang against the floor. Nathan heard it distantly. "What kind of position?" he said. "Hands-on development engineering, practical systems. You'd be working directly with my lead team on the transition mechanism, specifically on real-world stress testing and adaptive design." She paused. "I need someone who knows what breaks. My people are good at building. I need someone who's good at breaking." He looked at the schematic again. The secondary assist mechanism, the transition system. He could see, not in full technical detail, but in the way a mechanic sees a problem before he names it, where the complexity was going to cause issues, where it was going to bind under load in conditions the engineers might not have thought to test for. He thought about the math of his life. He thought about Lily and the winter shoes and the truck payment. He thought about the woman in the wheelchair by the curb and the way she'd rolled over his repair twice, testing it, not just trusting it. "I need to be honest with you," he said. "I don't have a degree. I have 11 years of fixing things, and I'm good at it. But I don't know what I don't know about this kind of engineering. I know that, she said. Some of your people are going to have a problem with it. She looked at him steadily. Some of them already do, she said. I informed my lead engineer this morning that I was bringing in an outside hire for the transition system work. He used the phrase unqualified generalist within the first 30 seconds. A pause. He's not wrong, technically. You are unqualified by conventional standards. Another pause. I found that conventional standards are sometimes the problem. Nathan sat with that for a moment. The salary, he said. She named a number. It was more than twice what he made. He kept his face still, which cost him something. Benefits package, full coverage, she continued. Start date is Monday, if you want it. She turned the schematic back toward herself. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly what you are, in a room with people who've never done that kind of work. There will be friction. You'll have to earn the respect. I can't do that part for you. She looked at him directly. But I think you can do it. He thought about all of it. The early mornings and the narrow mattress and the water stain on the ceiling, the 5 days of interview prep, the yellow legal pad, the woman in the wheelchair by the broken curb, testing his repair twice because trusting it once wasn't enough. Okay, he said. Sophia Bennett nodded once. Not a celebration, just an acknowledgement of the decision. Monday, she said. 8 a.m. Bring the toolbox. He told Lily that night over the tacos he'd promised her. She was chewing when he said it, and she stopped chewing, and then she started again. She set down her fork and looked at him across the kitchen table with those dark eyes that saw more than they let on and said, How much more money? Enough, he said. How much is enough? More than we have now. She picked up her fork again. Will you still pick me up from school? It was the only thing she asked, not what kind of job, not what the company did, not whether he was nervous or ready or qualified, just that. And it hit him somewhere low in the chest the way her question sometimes did, because she was 8 and she'd already learned which things were the things that actually mattered. I'll figure it out, he said. That means you don't know yet. It means I'll figure it out, he said. She considered this, then picked up her taco. Okay. He watched her eat and thought about what it meant that his daughter's primary concern about his career change was whether he'd still be there at 3:15 in the afternoon. He thought about her mother, who wasn't there at 3:15 and hadn't been for 2 years, and he thought about all the ways a kid absorbs the facts of her life without making a production of it. Lily had done that. She'd absorbed the divorce and the apartment and the tacos when things were hard the same way she absorbed everything, quietly, practically, without much drama. He called Marco after she went to bed. You're insane, Marco said by way of congratulations. Maybe. A mechanic running development engineering at a tech company. That's insane. She knows I'm a mechanic. She specifically wants that. Okay, but those engineers are going to eat you alive. Probably some of them, Nathan said. I know that. Marco was quiet for a moment. You're going anyway. Yeah. Good. A pause. You should go. I'm just saying, go knowing it's going to be hard. I know it's going to be hard. Harder than you think it's going to be. Marco. I'm just... Okay. Yes. Good. Go fix the wheelchair chair thing. Change lives. I'm proud of you. Another pause. You're completely insane. Nathan hung up and sat in the quiet apartment for a while. The sound of Lily breathing through the wall, the water stain on the ceiling, all the ordinary pieces of a life that might be about to shift. He didn't sleep great. That was fine. He hadn't expected to. Monday morning was harder than he'd planned. Not the work itself. Not yet. Just the fact of arriving. He parked in the same garage, badged in through the main entrance with his new employee credentials, and took the elevator to the 4th floor with his toolbox in one hand and a cup of gas station coffee in the other. And there was a moment in the elevator when the reality of what he was doing landed on him fully for the first time. Not as an abstract possibility, but as an actual fact. The doors were going to open, and he was going to walk into that engineering workspace and find somewhere to put his things and figure out where he was supposed to stand. The doors opened. The workspace was already active at 8 a.m. More people than he'd seen on Friday, voices and the sound of equipment and the low, persistent hum of a serious building doing serious work. Nathan walked in and found Sophia at the far end near the drafting tables, which was apparently where she spent most of her time. She was in conversation with two people he didn't know yet, both of them holding tablets, both of them looking at something on the large monitor beside her workstation. She looked up when he came in. Cole, then to the two people. This is Nathan Cole. He's joining the transition system team today. She said it without ceremony, the way you state a fact. Martinez will get you oriented. A woman came over from one of the side workbenches before he could ask who Martinez was. Early 30s, compact, with her hair pulled back and the kind of focused expression that suggested she considered orientation a task to be completed efficiently rather than a social event. She shook his hand briskly. Carmen Martinez, she said. Mechanical systems lead. She looked at the toolbox. Good. Come on. She walked him through the workspace at a pace that assumed he could keep up, pointing out stations and systems with brief descriptions. This was the primary fabrication bench. This was the CAD station. These were the material samples for the current drive frame iteration. She talked fast and didn't repeat herself, and when she asked if he had questions, she seemed genuinely open to them, which he appreciated. The transition mechanism, he said. Can I see the current prototype? She looked at him with a slightly different attention. You want to start there. That's what I'm here for. She took him to a workbench near the back of the space. The prototype was there, or part of it was, partially disassembled, components laid out in the organized grid pattern he'd noticed when he first came through. He set down his toolbox and looked at it. It was more sophisticated than it had appeared in the schematic. The secondary assist mechanism had been built out in 2 iterations, both of which were still present on the bench. The first clearly abandoned, the second partially completed. He could see where the engineering team had been going with it, and he could see within about 90 seconds of looking where it was going to fail. The load path through the transition mechanism placed stress on a joint assembly that would work fine in controlled testing, but would start fatiguing after real-world exposure to irregular surfaces, vibration, and the kind of asymmetric weight loading that happened when an actual person shifted their position. The engineers had calculated for average load. They hadn't fully accounted for dynamic load, the kind that happened in the messy, non-average conditions of actual daily use. He didn't say any of that yet. He just looked. What do you think? Carmen asked. She was watching him the way he'd noticed Sophia watched him, not waiting for an answer exactly, but watching the process. I think I need to handle it, he said. She nodded and stepped back. He spent 40 minutes with the prototype. He didn't take it apart. Not yet. Not without understanding the full system first. He just worked through it piece by piece the way he'd always approached an unfamiliar engine, following the logic, finding where the forces concentrated, building a picture of how the whole thing moved under stress. At some point, he became aware that he had an audience, not a large one. 3 engineers from nearby stations who had drifted over with the studied casualness of people pretending they weren't watching. He ignored them and kept working. When he finally looked up, Carmen was still there. The joint assembly here, he said, pointing, under dynamic load, uneven surfaces, passenger weight shift. It's going to start fatiguing at the anchor point. You won't see it in bench testing. You'll see it after 6 to 8 weeks of actual field use. Carmen looked at where he was pointing. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in it. We've had that conversation internally, she said carefully. The current design consensus is that the load calculations are within tolerance. They are for static load, Nathan said. But real-world use isn't static. A person in a wheelchair isn't a fixed weight sitting still. They're leaning forward to reach something. They're going over a transition at an angle. They're doing it 30 times a day. That joint is going to see asymmetric stress that your load model isn't capturing. One of the observers, a tall man in his late 30s with the bearing of someone used to being the smartest person in the room, said, without looking up from his own tablet, the load models are based on a 1,000-cycle fatigue analysis. Nathan looked at him. What kind of surface variation did you test? A pause. Standard surface tolerance specifications. Right. Nathan looked back at the prototype. Come find me after 6 weeks of field testing on actual city sidewalks. The man looked up now. He had sharp eyes and the particular expression of someone deciding how to categorize a problem. You're Cole, he said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. Derek Walsh, lead systems engineer. He said it with the weight of someone who expected the title to land. I understand you're joining the transition team. That's right. Walsh looked at Carmen, then back at Nathan with a measured neutrality that wasn't quite hostile but wasn't welcoming either. What's your engineering background? Automotive mechanics, 11 years. Formally trained? No. Walsh nodded once, slowly, in the way of a man filing information away. We'll see how the integration goes, he said, which was the most professional version Nathan had ever heard of. I don't think you belong here. Probably, Nathan said. Walsh went back to his tablet. The other two observers drifted away. Carmen caught Nathan's eye with an expression that was too controlled to read clearly, but he thought there might be something dry in it. Come on, she said. I'll show you where your station is. The first 2 weeks were not easy, which Nathan had anticipated, and were harder than he'd expected in specific ways he hadn't. The technical challenge he could manage. He was right about the joint assembly. He documented his analysis in the format Carmen taught him, submitted it through the engineering review process, and within a week had gotten a grudging acknowledgement from 2 of the 5 team members that the concern was valid. Walsh hadn't acknowledged it directly. He'd just proposed a design review of the transition mechanism load model, which was his way of arriving at the same place without admitting someone else had seen it first. Nathan didn't push it. He understood the territorial logic of expert communities. The shop had had it too. The older mechanics who had 15 years of certainty and didn't love it when a younger guy found the thing they missed. He knew you didn't fight that head on. You just kept doing the work, and eventually the work spoke clearly enough. What was harder was everything around the work. The vocabulary was a problem in ways he hadn't anticipated. Not the engineering concepts. The concepts were fine, and half of them mapped directly onto automotive systems he knew. But the language of the documentation, the formal technical notation, the way these engineers talked about problems, it had a texture he didn't have yet. He was spending 3 hours a night after Lily went to bed, reading manufacturing specs and materials engineering documents, and anything else he could get into his head, trying to build up the vocabulary fast enough that he could keep up in meetings without lagging half a beat behind. He was also, and he would not have admitted this to most people, lonely in a specific way. Not socially isolated exactly. Carmen was businesslike but fair, and a few of the junior engineers had been openly friendly in the way of people who were curious about the unusual hire. But there was a texture to the workplace relationships that he didn't fit yet, a shared language and shared reference points and shared history that everyone else had, and he didn't. They'd gone to the same kinds of schools, they'd done the same kinds of internships. They had a common vocabulary, not just for engineering, but for what engineering was, what kind of thing it was to do and who it was for, and where it fit in a life. Nathan had fixed cars. He knew what he knew deeply and practically, and from the inside, but he'd learned it a different way, and that made him, in this room, subtly foreign in a way that didn't show up in any meeting agenda, but was present constantly. He picked Lily up at 3:15 every afternoon. He'd arranged with Carmen to start at 7 a.m. and leave by 3, which Carmen had taken to Sophia, who had approved it without comment. He suspected that approval had cost him something in terms of perceptions he'd never fully know about. But it was non-negotiable, and he'd been clear about that from the beginning. Lily noticed he was tired. She didn't ask about it directly. She wasn't that kind of kid. But she was quieter in the evenings than she normally was, and once, after he'd nodded off on the couch while she was watching TV at 8 o'clock, she'd put a blanket over him without waking him, which he found out in the morning when he came to, and the blanket was there, and she was already at the kitchen table eating cereal. You put a blanket on me, he said. You looked cold. Thank you. She shrugged, not looking up from her cereal. Don't fall asleep on the couch again. Your neck is going to hurt. It does hurt. I told you. He stood there for a moment in the morning light. I'm going to get better at this, he said. The schedule. I'm still figuring it out. She looked up at him then, not with impatience, with the straightforward assessment of someone who was taking the statement at face value and weighing it. Okay, she said. Ishamanek. The direct confrontation came on a Thursday in the 3rd week, at a project review meeting. Nathan had put together a brief analysis of the transition mechanism under specific load conditions, a real-world scenario he'd modeled based on his own repair experience, replicating the kind of damage he'd seen at that curb and extrapolating how the prototype would perform in similar conditions. He'd done it in a format Carmen had helped him structure, a clean technical document that said what it said without extra words. Walsh had read it. Nathan could tell from the way Walsh looked at him when he walked into the meeting room that he'd read it carefully. There were 6 people at the table: Walsh, Carmen, 2 other engineers named Patel and Okafor, the project manager whose name was Hendricks, and Sophia at the head of the table in her chair. She was the only one who didn't have a printed copy of the analysis in front of her. She'd apparently read it on her screen because she had it pulled up on the tablet she kept to her right. The meeting started with project updates. Nathan sat and listened through the first 20 minutes, getting a feel for the room's rhythms. He'd learned that Walsh ran most technical discussions regardless of who was nominally leading, and that Carmen led him, and that Sophia listened without appearing to be the most powerful person present until something happened and she said something that reminded everyone she was. When they got to the transition mechanism update, Walsh put up a slide. "I've reviewed Cole's analysis," he said, using Nathan's last name the way he always did, a small distance that was probably unconscious. "The load scenario he's modeled is theoretically valid for extreme edge cases. However, the probability distribution of that load scenario in typical user population is low." He clicked to the next slide. "Our design already accounts for a safety factor above standard specification. The edge case scenario Mr. Cole is describing would require simultaneous surface irregularity, maximum passenger weight, and dynamic weight shift, conditions that are unlikely to coincide in a controlled real-world use case." He said Mr. Cole this time, rather than just Cole, which Nathan recognized as a deliberate shift: the formal address, the edge case framing, the probability argument. All of it technically correct, and all of it pointing away from the concern without actually resolving it. Nathan waited until Walsh finished. "Can I show you something?" he said. Walsh looked at him. "Go ahead." Nathan pulled out his phone. He turned it so the table could see the screen, and he opened a folder of photographs he'd been taking over the past 3 weeks. City sidewalks around Austin, curb cuts, transition surfaces. He'd been shooting them on his commute, during his lunch break, anytime he saw something relevant. There were 43 photos. "This is the real-world population," he said. "These are surfaces within a 2-mile radius of this building. That one," he pointed. "That buckle would put asymmetric load on the transition mechanism. That one would require a weight shift to compensate. That one has both." He scrolled. "They're not edge cases. They're Tuesday." The room was quiet. Patel leaned over to look at the phone. He was the quietest of the engineers, but the one Nathan had come to think was the most straightforwardly analytical. He made assessments based on evidence with less territorial investment than Walsh. He looked at the photos for a moment, then at the prototype schematic on the table. "He's not wrong about the frequency," Patel said. Not to Nathan, to the room generally. Walsh's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted slightly. The safety factor is calculated for a static load model," Nathan said, not raising his voice, just stating it. "I'm not trying to say the current design fails. I'm saying it fails faster than you think, in real use, by real people, on real sidewalks. And that matters because this isn't a prototype you're going to test in a lab and publish a paper about. It's a product that someone is going to use every day to live their life." He realized as he said it that the room had gone the particular quiet of a space where something real had been said. Not an argument quiet. Something different. He looked at Sophia. She was looking at him with the same expression she'd had in the parking lot outside the building that first day. The careful, measuring look of someone who was watching a proof resolve. She said, "What's your proposed solution, Cole?" "Redesign the anchor geometry. Add a secondary joint at the stress concentration point. It adds maybe 40 grams to the total weight. The dynamic load tolerance doubles." He paused. "I drew it up last night. It's rough, but the principle is sound." He pushed a folded paper across the table toward Carmen, who unfolded it and looked at it and then passed it to Patel, who looked at it and then passed it to Walsh. Walsh looked at it for a long time. "The geometry here is non-standard," he said. "It's adapted from a suspension component design I've worked on. Different application, same load problem." Walsh set the paper down. He looked at it. He looked at Nathan. His expression had the quality of a man in the process of revising a position he'd held comfortably and not enjoying the revision. "It would need to be modeled formally," he said finally. "Yes." "And tested through the full protocol." "Yes." A pause. The concept has merit, Walsh said. It cost him something. Nathan could hear it, the faint friction of it. But the man was an engineer and the geometry was sound, and at some level, that was what everything came down to. Sophia said, Martinez, let's get it into the modeling queue. Carmen nodded. I'll have specs drafted by end of week. The meeting moved on to the next item. Nathan sat back and picked up his water bottle and took a drink. Across the table, Patel gave him a brief look that said nothing specific but wasn't unfriendly. Walsh didn't look at him, but he didn't need to. Quote, 3 days after the meeting, Walsh stopped at Nathan's station. It was late in the day. Most people had started wrapping up, the workspace getting quieter. Nathan was working through a stress modeling exercise Carmen had assigned him as part of getting up to speed on the formal documentation side of things, and he looked up when he registered Walsh's presence nearby. Walsh stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets, looking at the prototype on the bench rather than at Nathan. The anchor geometry, he said. I ran it through a quick preliminary model last night. He paused. The stress distribution is better than I expected. Nathan nodded. Walsh was still looking at the prototype. You've done this kind of thing before, adapting a solution from one system to another. All the time, Nathan said. That's most of what mechanics is. Every car is a different version of the same set of problems. You learn to recognize the problem underneath the application. Walsh was quiet for a moment. That's not a bad way to approach it, he said, which was as close to a compliment as Walsh appeared to get. He picked up one of the component samples from the bench, looked at it, set it down. The documentation format on your analysis was clean. Carmen help you with that? She showed me the structure. I did the write-up. It read like someone who knew what they were talking about and knew how to say it. Another pause. Both parts matter. He picked up his bag from the bench nearby and walked toward the elevator. Nathan watched him go. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a declaration of changed opinion. It was a man who'd decided to recalibrate, doing it in the way his character allowed, which was sideways and with his eyes on the prototype rather than the person he was recalibrating toward. Nathan understood that. It was how the older mechanics at the shop had done it too. You didn't get a ceremony, you got the work acknowledged. He turned back to the stress modeling exercise. Sophia found him at his station the following week, at an unusual time, mid-afternoon, when she was typically in meetings or at her drafting table. She rolled up to the edge of his bench and looked at what he was working on, which was a revised version of the anchor geometry in physical mock-up form, built from scrap material to test the basic principle before it went into formal fabrication. How's the mock-up coming? She said. Stiff, he said. I want to work the tolerances down. Carmen's waiting on the refined specs. Sophia looked at the mock-up. Then she said, without particular preamble, How are you finding it? He glanced at her. The job? The everything. He thought about that for a moment, the way you think about a question that's asking more than it's asking. He set down the tool he was holding. It's hard, he said. Not the engineering part. The language of it, the documentation, the way you all talk to each other about work. I'm catching up. I'm behind in ways I didn't expect to be behind. He paused. But the mechanical problems are the mechanical problems. I see them the same way regardless of what industry you're in. She was quiet for a moment. Walsh told me the anchor geometry is promising. Walsh told me it had merit. That's not quite the same thing, but I'll take it. The corner of her mouth moved, that almost smile again. He's hard to impress. I noticed. He's also the best structural analysis engineer I've ever worked with, she said. When he thinks something is worth pursuing, it's worth pursuing. She looked at the mock-up again. He thinks this is worth pursuing. Nathan picked up the tool again and turned a component in his hand, feeling the fit. What made you hire me? He said. He'd been thinking about it for 3 weeks and hadn't asked, and he wasn't entirely sure why he was asking now, except that they were alone at the bench and the workspace was quiet around them, and it felt like a moment when a direct question would get a direct answer. She looked at him in that steady way. I told you. You told me what you saw in the footage and what you thought it meant. That's not the same as why you made the call. She was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, more like she was being precise about how to say something. I've been building this technology for 2 years, she said. The people I have are brilliant. They're the best trained engineers I could find. And they design for a user. They design very carefully, very thoughtfully, for a person they've studied and analyzed and modeled. She paused. But none of them have ever been stuck at a broken curb cut. None of them have ever had to wait and see if someone would stop. She looked at the mock-up, then back at him. I need someone who knows what that moment feels like, not the data version of it, the actual version. Nathan sat with that. Did you know who I was? He asked. On the sidewalk. No, she said. I was having a bad morning, and I was late to a meeting, and my chair was stuck, and you pulled over. A pause. I didn't know until I got back to the office and pulled the footage to report the curb damage. He nodded. He thought about her sitting on that sidewalk, watching him fix the concrete, watching him do it right even when there was no reason he had to. He thought about what she must have thought in that moment. It would have been easier, he said, to just help you get clear and leave. Yes, she said. It would have. She looked at the mock-up one more time. Finish the tolerances. Carmen needs those specs. She moved the chair back from the bench and headed toward the drafting tables. Nathan watched her go. The practiced efficiency with which she navigated the workspace, the particular way she read a room from the chair, the speed with which she moved from the personal to the work and back without losing either. He looked at the mock-up. He picked up the tool again. He thought about 43 photographs of broken sidewalks. He thought about 8-year-old Lily with a blanket and a bowl of cereal and the clearest sense of priority he'd ever encountered in a person. He thought, I need to get these tolerances right. And he got back to work. The anchor geometry passed formal modeling on a Wednesday morning in November, 6 weeks after Nathan had drawn it on a folded piece of paper and pushed it across the meeting room table. Carmen sent the results to the full team in an email with no subject line flourish, just the file number and FYI in the header, which was her style. Nathan read it at his station, then read the attached report twice, following the stress distribution data through the load scenarios he'd originally photographed on those Austin sidewalks. The numbers held. Not just held, they were better than his preliminary estimate by a margin that surprised even him. Patel stopped by his bench that morning. Good result, he said, which from Patel was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. Thanks. Walsh is already talking about the next iteration. Nathan looked up. You say that directly? He told Carmen the geometry had scalable application to the elevation assist system. Patel paused. For Walsh, that's a love letter. Nathan laughed. Actually laughed, which felt like the first time he'd done that in the building without it being a social reflex. Patel looked mildly satisfied and went back to his station. The small victory didn't change the texture of everything else, but it changed something. He noticed that the engineers who'd drifted over to watch him in the early weeks now drifted over with different body language, less surveillance, more genuine interest. A junior engineer named Torres had started asking him questions about automotive load principles in a way that was clearly not accidental, coming by the bench with specific questions framed carefully enough that Nathan understood the kid was using him as a resource without wanting to make it obvious. He answered the questions without making it obvious back, and Torres kept coming. It was progress. Slow, sideways, largely unannounced. The kind that a person who'd worked in shops for 11 years recognized because it was the only kind that was real. The harder thing that month wasn't at work. It was a Tuesday when Lily's teacher called. Not the school's main line, Ms. Hendricks called Nathan's cell directly at 1:47 in the afternoon, which Nathan had learned meant something specific about the nature of the call. He stepped out of the fabrication area and into the stairwell, which was the quietest place he'd found in the building. Nathan, I'm not calling about anything urgent, Ms. Hendricks said, in the way people said things weren't urgent when they were somewhat urgent. But I wanted to check in about Lily. She's been a little withdrawn the last couple of weeks, quieter than usual in class. Nothing alarming, but it's different from her baseline. Nathan stood in the stairwell with his hand against the concrete wall. Different how? She's not engaging in group activities the way she was. She's fine one-on-one, still doing her work, but the social piece has pulled back a bit. A pause. Has anything changed at home recently? He thought about the blanket on the couch, the cereal in the morning. I started a new job, he said, 6 weeks ago. The hours are different. I'm more tired in the evenings. That tracks, Ms. Hendricks said, which wasn't a judgment but landed close to one. She may be picking up on your stress. Kids her age internalize the household emotional temperature. He knew that. He'd known it for years, had always known it, It was why he'd trained himself to keep his worry out of his face when he was around her. But he was not, apparently, doing as good a job of that as he'd thought. "I'll pay more attention," he said. "She's a great kid," Ms. Hendricks said. "She's going to be fine. I just wanted you to have the information." He stood in the stairwell for a moment after the call ended, phone in his hand, looking at nothing. Then he went back in. He left at 3 sharp, drove to school, and when Lily got in the truck, he didn't ask about her day the way he normally did. He asked if she wanted to go to Barton Springs. She looked at him sideways. "Today? It's not that cold. It's 62 degrees. That's fine." She looked at him for another moment. "Okay," she said. They went to Barton Springs. They didn't swim. It was genuinely too cold for that. But they walked along the edge of the water, and Lily threw pebbles in, and Nathan sat on the grass and watched her, and didn't look at his phone once. They stayed until the light started going gold, and the temperature dropped another 4 degrees, and Lily came and sat beside him on the grass with her knees pulled up to her chest. "Is your job hard?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Like hard or just busy?" He thought about it. "Both. I'm learning a lot of stuff fast. It's good, but it's tiring." She was quiet for a moment, throwing the last pebble, watching it skip twice and sink. "At school they asked what our parents do for work." "What'd you say?" "I said you fix things." She paused. "Then I said you work at a big technology company because you're really good at fixing things." He looked at her. "Yeah?" "The teacher asked if it was like software." "What did you say?" "I said no. It's more like engineering, physical engineering." She said the last 2 words with the deliberate pronunciation of someone who'd thought about how to say them. "Is that right?" "That's pretty right," he said. She nodded like she'd had that confirmed. They sat there a while longer, and when the cold got real, they walked back to the truck, and he bought her a hot chocolate from the gas station on the way home, and she held it with both hands, and they drove in the particular quiet that was theirs, comfortable and honest and enough. He paid more attention after that. He was still tired in the evenings, but he kept himself present for the 2 hours between pickup and bedtime, regardless of what was sitting in his head from the day. It cost him an hour of reading at night, which meant he stayed later in the morning studying instead. He was running a sleep deficit that was becoming structural, but he didn't know how to close it without giving something up that wasn't givable. He managed. It wasn't elegant, and it wasn't the version of fatherhood he wanted it to be, but he managed. The real test at work came in December, and it didn't come from Walsh. Sophia called a project status meeting that included, for the first time, external stakeholders, 2 representatives from a medical devices investment group called Meridian Capital, that was one of Vertex's primary funding sources for the mobility project. Their names were Garrett Osei and Lisa Park. They were polite, professionally dressed, and had the particular quality of people who had read everything in a file and trusted none of it fully. They sat at the far end of the meeting room table from Sophia with their own tablets and their own printouts, and they asked questions with the measured precision of people whose job was to find the gap between what a presentation claimed and what was actually true. Nathan hadn't been told he'd be presenting. He found out 20 minutes before the meeting when Carmen appeared at his bench and told him Sophia wanted him to walk the transition system work. He looked at her. "Me. You." Carmen set a folder on his bench. "Here's the documentation package. You wrote most of it, so you know it. Just walk them through it the way you'd explain it to someone who's technically literate but doesn't know this specific system." She paused. "Don't oversell. Don't undersell. Just say what it is." "I've never done a stakeholder presentation." "I know." She picked up her tablet. "Neither had I the first time. It's fine." She walked away, which was her version of encouragement. He spent the 20 minutes reading through the documentation package, which was not enough time and he knew it, and then he walked into the meeting room and sat where Carmen pointed and waited. Garrett Osei opened with a general progress question directed at Sophia, and she gave a crisp summary of the project timeline and current development stage. Then she said, "Nathan Cole is leading the transition system work." Nathan. He stood, which he had always done when presenting something. It was just habit, and he realized halfway up that nobody else had stood and that the room had an expectant quality that he was going to have to move through. He walked them through the anchor geometry analysis, the original problem, the load model gap, his approach, the formal modeling results. He kept it clean and sequential, and he showed them the 43 photographs of Austin sidewalks, which he'd formatted into a proper document with annotations now rather than a phone screen. He talked about the stress distribution data without oversimplifying it, because Carmen had told him Lisa Park had a materials engineering background and would notice. When he finished, Osei asked 3 questions. The first 2 Nathan answered directly. The third one he didn't know the answer to, and he said so, and said he'd follow up with documentation by the end of the week. Park asked about the scalability of the anchor geometry to other mobility applications. Nathan said it had application to elevation assist and potentially to adaptive vehicle entry systems, referenced the automotive parallel he'd drawn from originally, and said the formal scalability analysis was in the next phase of the design process. Your background is automotive mechanics, Park said. Not critically, just noting it. 11 years, Nathan said. That's an unusual entry point for this kind of work. It is, he said. How are you finding the translation? He thought about that for a moment. The problems are different in scale and application. The approach is the same. You understand what forces are present. You understand where the system is vulnerable. You design for the real conditions rather than the ideal ones. He paused. Automotive work taught me that real conditions are almost never ideal. Park looked at him for a moment, then made a note on her tablet. It was impossible to know what the note said, which he found characteristically frustrating about people who took notes in meetings. Osei asked Sophia a funding timeline question, and the meeting moved on. Nathan sat back down, and Carmen, beside him, said nothing but briefly pressed her foot against his under the table, which he recognized as her version of that was fine. After the meeting, in the hallway, Walsh fell into step beside him. It was unusual enough that Nathan registered it without making a thing of it. Park's question about scalability, Walsh said. The answer you gave was correct, but there's a more formal framing we should develop before the next stakeholder cycle. A pause. I'll send you a reference document tonight. Nathan looked at him. Thanks. Walsh nodded once and peeled off toward his office. Nathan stood in the hallway for a moment and thought, well, there it is. The shift in the team dynamic happened gradually enough that Nathan couldn't point to a single moment, only to a collection of them. Patel started bringing his lunch to Nathan's bench twice a week to talk through problems. Not Nathan's problems, his own, which meant Patel had decided Nathan's perspective was worth having on things outside the transition system. Torres stopped framing his questions as accidental and just started asking them directly. Even Walsh's reference document, which arrived that night as promised, was annotated with Walsh's own notes in a way that told Nathan the man had not just forwarded a file, but actually thought about what would be useful to him specifically. It wasn't warmth, most of it. It was respect, which Nathan understood to be a different thing, and in some ways a more durable one. Sophia saw all of it, he was fairly sure. She had the quality of a person who tracked the room without appearing to, who knew where the friction was, and where it was easing, and what it meant, and who intervened rarely because she'd found that most things resolved themselves if you let them run. She and Nathan had developed a working rhythm that had its own texture by December. She'd come by his bench in the afternoon, not always, maybe 3 times a week, and look at what he was working on and ask a question. Sometimes the question was technical. Sometimes it was more like the question she'd asked that first time, the kind that was really asking something else. One afternoon she came by and he was working through a new problem, a vibration frequency issue in the drive motor that Carmen had flagged. And without looking up from the component he was measuring, he said, "If you're going to ask how I'm finding it again, I'm going to tell you I'm still behind on the documentation language, and my kid thinks I look tired. A beat." "She told you that?" Sophia said. "She tells me most things. She's 8 and she has no filter." He set down the caliper. "The vibration frequency on this drive motor is going to couple with the frame resonance at certain speeds. It's going to feel like road buzz, but it's structural." Sophia came closer and looked at the component. "Martinez flagged it?" "She measured it. I'm trying to figure out the coupling threshold." He picked up the caliper again. "Your daughter says you look tired. What do you say to that?" The question surprised him slightly, coming out of his own mouth. He wasn't sure where it had come from, except that it was there and it was honest. Sophia was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the component on the bench, her hands in her lap. "I don't have a daughter," she said. "I know. I mean, hypothetically, if someone who was close to you said that," she turned the chair slightly, a small adjustment, "I'd tell them they weren't wrong." A pause. And then I'd get back to work because the work was the thing that needed doing. Is that a healthy approach? Probably not. She looked at the component again. Show me the frequency measurement. He showed her. She looked at the numbers with the focused attention she brought to everything technical, and then she said, "The coupling threshold. You think it's in the operational speed range? High end of it, so not constant, but frequent enough to matter. How do you solve it? Change the motor mount geometry or add a dampening layer between the mount and the frame. First option is cleaner, second is faster." He paused. "Depends on how much time we have before the next prototype build." She looked at him. "How fast can you do the mount geometry change?" "Give me the fabrication time and I can have a revised spec by end of week." "Do it." She moved the chair back from the bench. He watched her go and thought about her answer. The work was the thing that needed doing, and recognized it because he said something similar to himself most mornings and had been saying it since Lily was born. The way work became not just a livelihood, but a structure, a reason to keep moving, a place to put the parts of yourself that didn't fit anywhere else. He understood that. He understood it maybe too well. Dick. The prototype build started the second week of December, and it was when everything became real in a different way. The team had been working with components and mock-ups and models, and Nathan had gotten good at that register of the work, the analytical, iterative, document and revise rhythm of development engineering. But when the fabrication team assembled the first full prototype with the revised anchor geometry and the new motor mount design incorporated, and it sat on the bench in the workshop as an actual object, a complete system that could actually move and carry weight and do the thing it was designed to do, he stood in front of it for a long time. Carmen came and stood beside him. She was quiet for a moment, too. "You want to test it?" she said. "Yeah." "Go ahead." He ran it through the basic motion sequence first, checking each system methodically, the way he'd check a new engine on the bench, not trusting anything until he'd verified it personally. The drive system engaged smoothly. The transition mechanism, his transition mechanism, the one that had started as 43 photographs in a folded piece of paper, activated cleanly at the simulated curb transition, bearing the test load with the geometry distributing stress exactly the way the model said it would. He put it through the surface variation sequence, which simulated the irregular surfaces he'd cataloged. The system handled each transition without binding, without the fatigue pattern he'd originally identified, without any of the failure modes that had been in the original design. He ran the asymmetric load test. He ran the dynamic weight shift simulation. He ran everything. It held. He was aware that several people had gathered behind him: Carmen, Torres, Patel, 2 fabrication techs. He turned around, and they were all looking at the prototype, and then at him with the expression of people who had watched something come together. "Good?" Carmen said. "Good," he said. Walsh appeared at the edge of the group. He looked at the prototype, then at Nathan. "The mount geometry," he said. "The dampening characteristic is better than the model predicted." "Real-world materials do that sometimes," Nathan said. Walsh nodded once. He looked at the prototype again for a long moment. Then he said, "This works," in the tone of a man making a formal statement. Not a compliment, a judgment, a professional assessment. It was the closest thing to high praise Nathan had ever heard Derek Walsh produce, and from the slight shift in Carmen's expression, he gathered he wasn't wrong about that. Sophia came to the workshop that evening after most people had left. Nathan was still there. He'd been running additional tests, the particular obsessive thoroughness that kicked in when he had something working and needed to verify it from every angle. The workshop was quiet, just him and the prototype, and the low sound of the building's ventilation system. She came up beside him and looked at the system. "How many times have you run it?" she said. 40-some? Find anything? No. Good. She was quiet for a moment. She moved the chair forward slightly until she was closer to the prototype than she normally positioned herself near objects in the workspace. Nathan noticed it, but didn't remark on it. "Can I run it?" she said. He looked at her. "It's not configured for an actual user yet. The seating system is the test rig, not a—" "I know." She looked at the prototype. "Can I run it anyway?" He thought about it for a moment, weighing what Carmen would say and what the protocol was versus what was actually being asked. Then he said, yeah. He adjusted the test rig configuration as much as he could, which wasn't perfect, and he told her what to expect from the controls, and she transferred to the prototype with a practiced efficiency that told him she'd done hundreds of transfers and found no reason to comment on any of them. She activated the drive system. She ran it forward across the workshop floor, slow at first, then at a more natural pace. She took it to the simulated curb transition at the far end of the workshop and ran it through twice, forward and back. She ran the surface variation sequence with the manual control rather than the automatic test program. Nathan stood and watched and said nothing. She brought it back to where she'd started and sat still for a moment, hands in her lap. The transition, she said. Her voice had a different quality than it normally did in the workshop. Less processed, more direct. It's quiet. The geometry absorbs the impact instead of transmitting it to the frame, he said. I know why it's quiet. A pause. I'm telling you what it feels like. She looked down at the armrests, then out across the workshop. Current systems, even good ones, you feel every curb transition as a jolt. You brace for it. After a day of it, your shoulders hurt. She paused. This one you just go through. He didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what to say or if anything needed to be said. She was quiet for a moment longer. Then she said, in a tone that had returned to its normal register, the seeding integration is going to be the next critical piece. I want you in those design discussions. Okay. She transferred back to her own chair, again without comment, without ceremony, just the practical business of moving through the world. She positioned herself at the door of the workshop. Go home, Cole, she said. You have a kid to pick up in the morning. She goes in at 8, then sleep until 7:30. She left. Nathan stood in the quiet workshop for a while after she was gone. The prototype sat under the work lights, 40-some test cycles on it, holding everything it was supposed to hold. He thought about what she'd said. You just go through. The matter-of-fact way she'd said it, without drama or sentiment, just the plain statement of a thing that would change something real in a real person's day. He thought about the broken curb on that October morning, the motor whirring against the stuck wheel, the way she'd tested his repair twice before she trusted it. He thought about Lily and the blanket on the couch, and You Look Tired and the hot chocolate from the gas station held in both hands on a November evening. He thought about all the things a person could build if they were willing to pay attention to what the actual problem was. He turned off the workshop lights and went home. January came in cold by Austin standards, which meant 50 degrees and a wind that had opinions about it. And the Vertex workspace ran hotter than usual because the prototype build had moved into its second phase and there were more people in the room doing more things, and the collective energy of a project gaining momentum had its own kind of heat. Nathan had been at Vertex 3 months. He knew where everything was. He knew which coffee machine on the 4th floor ran weak and which one ran strong. He knew that Patel arrived at 6:45 every morning and was not conversational until 8 o'clock, that Torres stress ate from the vending machine when a design wasn't cooperating, that Carmen's efficiency increased in direct proportion to how much pressure the project was under. He knew that Walsh kept a photo of his kids, 2 boys, elementary school age, tucked under the edge of his monitor in a way that suggested he didn't want it to be a thing, but also couldn't bring himself to put it away. He knew Sophia's tells, too, by now. The way she got quieter in direct proportion to how serious a problem was, rather than louder, which threw people who expected the opposite. The way she turned her chair slightly when she was thinking through something, a small half-degree adjustment that was probably unconscious. The way she asked questions she already knew the answer to when she wanted to hear how someone else had gotten there, because the path mattered to her as much as the destination. He knew all of this the way you come to know a place that has become, without your fully noticing it, part of your daily life. The seeding integration work had consumed December and pushed deep into January. It was more complex than the transition mechanism in some ways, less a mechanical problem and more a systems problem, the kind where every decision about one component created consequences for 3 others, and the challenge was holding the whole picture clearly enough to see where those consequences were going before they became problems. Nathan had been brought into the design discussions the way Sophia said he would be, and he'd learned quickly that his value in those conversations was not the same as his value at the bench. At the bench, he was fast and certain. In design discussions, he was slower, more deliberate, more likely to say I need to think about that than to answer immediately, which was different from his bench instincts and had taken some getting used to on both sides. But what he brought, the insistence on testing every elegant solution against the question of what happened when a real person used it, in a real environment, had started to shape the room's thinking in ways he could see accumulating over time. Walsh had stopped using Nathan's last name only in January, a shift so quiet it might have been accidental, except that nothing Walsh did was accidental. It was just Nathan now in meetings, same as everyone else. Nathan had not remarked on it and did not plan to. Until the investor problem arrived without warning on a Thursday morning. Sophia called the full project team into the main conference room at 9 a.m. without a pre-meeting agenda, which was unusual enough that Nathan saw Carmen clock it as she walked in, a brief tightening around her eyes before she sat down and got her neutral expression back in place. Sophia was already at the head of the table when they filed in, which was also unusual. She normally came in last, when everyone was seated. Nathan took this as a data point and filed it. Meridian Capital is pulling back their participation, she said, before anyone had fully settled. No preamble, just the fact. Not withdrawing, but pulling back. They're reducing their commitment for the next funding phase by 40%. The room absorbed this. Nathan watched people's faces do the math at different speeds. Hendricks, the project manager, said, "The timeline is affected, yes," Sophia said. "We need to compress phase 3 and 4 into a single development cycle and have a complete functional prototype ready for external review in 9 weeks. 9 weeks, Walsh said. Not a question. A recalibration. Meridian's condition for maintaining even the reduced commitment is a demonstration at the Mobitech National Expo in March. Functional prototype, live demonstration, in front of an industry audience." She looked around the table. "If the demonstration goes well, 2 other potential investors who will be present have indicated interest in coming in for the full funding we need. If it doesn't—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Nathan looked at the prototype build timeline in his head. They were maybe 60% through Phase 2 seeding integration. Phase 3 was the full systems integration, drive, transition, seeding, elevation assist, all working together as one system. Phase 4 was environmental testing, real surfaces, real conditions, the kind of testing that took time because real conditions were unpredictable by definition. 9 weeks. "What happened with Meridian?" Carmen asked. Sophia's expression didn't change. Garrett Osei's board changed priorities. Mobility tech is still on their list, but it moved down. A pause. "It's a business decision. It's not personal, and it's not a judgment on the project." She said it with the steadiness of someone who had already processed the personal dimension of it privately and was now operating in the professional register. Walsh had a legal pad out and was writing. "If we collapse phases 3 and 4, we're running environmental testing concurrently with systems integration. That's not standard protocol." "No," Sophia said, "it isn't. The risk profile goes up." "I know. If we find a systems failure during environmental testing, we won't have time to redesign and retest before March." "I know that too." She looked at him. "What's your assessment of the current design's failure probability?" Walsh was quiet for a moment. Nathan watched him do the engineering calculation honestly, which was the only way Walsh knew how to do calculations. "Lower than it was 3 months ago," he said. Not looking at Nathan when he said it, but not looking at him either. "Nathan," Sophia said. He'd been waiting for it. "The transition system is solid. The motor mount has held through 60 test cycles without anomaly. The seating integration is the variable. We're still in mid-build there. How far we can compress depends on where we are in the integration by end of next week." "Where will you be by end of next week?" "Ask me Monday morning. I'll have a real number for you." She nodded once. "The team gets the weekend." A pause. "I'd appreciate it if people use some of it to think." She looked around the table one more time, the steady look that didn't ask for anything specific but communicated clearly what was at stake. "That's all." People filed out. Nathan stayed seated, partly because he was still thinking and partly because Sophia hadn't moved her chair, and he'd learned that when she stayed it meant there was something else. She waited until the last person left. "There's something I didn't say in there," she said. He waited. The Mobitech Expo isn't just about Meridian. If the demonstration goes well, the industry visibility, hospitals, rehabilitation centers, procurement directors, that's the market. That's what makes this a product rather than a prototype. She looked at the table. I've been building toward this for 2 years. This is the moment where it becomes real or it doesn't. It's going to become real, Nathan said. She looked at him. You don't know that. No, he said. But I know the transition system works, and I know the motor mount works, and I know that the seating integration problems we still have are solvable because I've been looking at them every day and none of them are fundamental. He paused. 9 weeks is tight. It's not impossible. She held his gaze for a moment. There was something in her expression that was harder to read than usual. Not the composed CEO register, not the focused engineer register, something more personal and less comfortable. When I started this company, she said, I had a clear reason, obvious reason. You know what it was? Yeah. And somewhere in the last 2 years of building it, the funding cycles, the hiring, the investor management, I got far enough from that reason that some days I had to remind myself what it was. She looked at her hands, this prototype, the way it ran in the workshop that night. A pause. I don't have to remind myself anymore. Nathan didn't say anything for a moment. Then, good. That's the version of you I need running this project for the next 9 weeks. Something shifted in her expression, not quite the almost smile, closer to it than usual. Get me a number by Monday morning, she said. You'll have it. He spent part of Saturday at the workshop. He'd arranged for Lily to spend the day with Marco's family, who had 2 kids close to her age and a backyard and a dog, and she'd gone with no complaint because the dog was specifically a draw. He went in at 9 and worked through the seating integration components alone, which he sometimes preferred because the workspace had a different quality without people in it, quieter in a way that let him think without the background noise of other people's thinking. Carmen came in at noon. She didn't look surprised to see him. The mounting bracket tolerances, she said, without preamble, pulling up a stool. That's what I'm on. I ran the numbers last night. If we prefabricate the revised brackets this week and run the full integration test the week after, we're 2 weeks ahead of where I thought we were. He looked at her. You ran them last night. I couldn't sleep. She said it with the flat practicality she applied to everything. The bracket tolerances are the critical path. Everything else is parallel work. If we nail those this week, the 9 weeks is achievable. Not comfortable. No. Achievable. She pulled out her tablet. I want to walk through the fabrication sequence. Tell me where your instinct says it'll bind. They worked through it for 2 hours. Not the formal design discussion version. This was bench talk, the shorthand of 2 people who'd been working the same problem from different directions and had developed a shared technical language for it. Carmen was rigorous and fast, and she caught things Nathan missed, and he caught things she missed, and at the end of 2 hours, they had a fabrication sequence that both of them thought could work. You're good at this, Carmen said, gathering her tablet. Not the way someone says it to be kind. The way a mechanic says it about another mechanic. An assessment of craft. So are you, he said. She stood up. I know. She picked up her bag. Monday morning, have the bracket spec refined. Will do. She left. Nathan stayed another hour, refining the spec, and then he drove to Marco's to pick up Lily. Yet, she was in the backyard when he arrived, running with the dog in a way that suggested she'd been doing it for the last hour, and had no immediate plans to stop. Marco came out with 2 beers and handed Nathan one without asking. She's been out there since 2, Marco said. Is the dog okay? The dog is 22 pounds and she's been lapping him for an hour. The dog is not okay. He sat down in one of the patio chairs. You okay? We got some bad news on the project today. Have 9 weeks to finish something that was going to take 5 months. Marco looked at him. And we're going to do it in 9 weeks. Yeah, I figured. Marco drank his beer. How's the Sophia Bennett thing going? Nathan looked at him. What Sophia Bennett thing? The thing where you talk about your CEO by her full name like you're reading off a press release, which means you're actively trying to sound neutral about her. Nathan drank his beer. That's what I thought, Marco said. It's a professional situation. Okay, she's my boss. I know. It's not a thing. I didn't say it was a thing. I asked how it was going. Marco looked out at the yard where Lily was now sitting on the grass with the dog collapsed dramatically against her leg. You talk about her differently than you talk about the other people at work. That's all I'm saying. Nathan looked at the yard too. She's different than the other people at work. Different how? He thought about the workshop. You just go through, the matter-of-fact way she'd said it. The way she'd stayed in the conference room after everyone left and said, I don't have to remind myself anymore. She knows exactly why she's doing what she's doing, he said. Every day. That's rarer than you'd think. Marco was quiet for a moment. Then, yeah, it is. Lily looked over and saw Nathan and raised one hand in a wave that was about 30% enthusiasm, because she was clearly not done with the dog. He raised his beer in return. I'm not in a position to make anything complicated, Nathan said. I've got 9 weeks to finish building something that matters, and a kid who needs me to show up every day. That's the whole picture right now. Sure, Marco said, in the tone of a man who believed that and also didn't entirely believe it. Nathan finished his beer and didn't say anything else about it. So, the 9 weeks were the hardest sustained work of his life. Not the hardest single day or the hardest problem. The hardest sustained thing. The kind of hard that compounds daily, where each week you're carrying the fatigue of the week before plus the new pressure of the current one, and the challenge is not any individual moment, but the accumulation of all of them. The fabrication sequence Carmen had worked out held, mostly. The bracket tolerances came in right the first time, which Nathan had not taken for granted, and was genuinely relieved about, because a bad first fabrication would have cost them a week they couldn't give. Walsh ran the system's integration analysis with a precision that Nathan had come to understand was the man's primary gift. Not innovation, not lateral thinking, but an almost inhuman exactness in stress analysis and load modeling that caught the problems that would have slipped through a less rigorous process. They were a good team. Nathan had not expected to think that so clearly, so early, but it was true. They were a good team with genuine complementary strengths, and the 9 weeks revealed that in the way that pressure always reveals the truth of things. There were failures. A drive motor coupling failed on the 3rd week of integrated testing. Not a design failure, a fabrication tolerance issue in the third-party component that took 4 days to diagnose and resolve. The elevation assist system developed an intermittent fault in week 6 that sent Walsh and Nathan through 3 days of joint diagnostic work that felt, at times, like it was going to end them both until Nathan traced it to a grounding issue in the control circuit that was the kind of thing you only found by crawling through every single connection until you found the one that was slightly wrong. When he found it, at 11 p.m., on a Wednesday with Walsh sitting at the bench across from him, Walsh said, "That's it," in a voice that was approximately the most relieved Nathan had ever heard him sound. "Yeah," Nathan said. They sat there for a moment in the quiet of the empty workspace. "Your diagnostic process," Walsh said after a moment. "The way you went through the circuit. Systematic but non-sequential. You jumped to the grounding before you'd ruled out the sensor array. Grounding issues present intermittently, sensor faults present consistently. It was presenting intermittently." Walsh was quiet. "That's not in any diagnostic protocol I've seen." "It's not a protocol. It's pattern recognition from 11 years of electrical gremlins in automotive systems." Nathan paused. "Intermittent faults are almost always a bad connection. You learn to go there first." Walsh absorbed this. "That's worth documenting." "I'll write it up." They locked up the workspace and walked to the elevator together, which had not happened before. Walsh pressed the lobby button and they rode down without talking, the comfortable quiet of two people who had just done something difficult together and didn't need to narrate it. In the lobby, Walsh said, "The demonstration." He stopped and seemed to recalibrate what he was going to say. "The system is solid enough. If the demonstration fails, it won't be an engineering failure." Nathan looked at him. It was the clearest expression of confidence Walsh had offered on the project. "Good," Nathan said. "Let's make sure it doesn't fail for any other reason either." Walsh almost smiled. It was a very small thing, barely a movement, but Nathan caught it. "Good night, Cole." "Night, Walsh." Sophia and Nathan had a particular conversation in week 7 that he thought about for a long time after. It was late, the workspace mostly empty, both of them at the drafting table going through the demonstration protocol she'd been developing. The Mobitech Expo was in Dallas, a 2-day event at a convention center with their demonstration scheduled for the second afternoon. She'd been building the presentation sequence for a week, and she walked Nathan through it the way she walked through everything, direct, precise, no wasted motion. When she finished, he said, You're not going to be in the chair during the demonstration. She looked at him. What? The presentation sequence. You've designed it so the demonstration subject is someone else, a test driver. He paused. You should be in the chair. I'm presenting. You can present from the chair. You do it every day. This is different. This is a live demonstration in front of the people who need to see what this product is for. He said it as evenly as he could, not as a challenge. You running the system is the demonstration, not a test driver running it while you stand at a podium. He paused. It's your story. It's your technology. The room needs to see that at the same time. She was quiet for a long moment. He watched her sit with it, the thing she was deciding. That's a vulnerable position, she said. Yeah. If something goes wrong during the demonstration, we have bigger problems than your positioning, he said. The system works. We've run it 200 times. We both know it works. Another silence. It feels like making the wheelchair the story, she said. Her voice was flat when she said it, the flatness of someone describing something they'd had to develop armor around. No, Nathan said. It makes the engineer who built the technology the story. That's not the same thing. She looked at him for a long moment. The drafting table lamp threw the light at an angle that made her expression harder to read than usual. I'll think about it, she said. That means yes, he said. It means I'll think about it. But the corner of her mouth moved, the almost smile. He let it go. Good. The finished prototype was completed on a Friday afternoon in the last week of February, 11 days before the Mobitech Expo. Carmen ran the final sign-off test sequence and then sat back on her stool and looked at the system and said, "Done," in the tone of a person who had not been entirely sure this day would arrive. Torres was there, and Patel, and two of the fabrication techs who'd been on the build through the whole cycle. Walsh stood at the edge of the group with his arms crossed and looked at the prototype with the particular expression of someone reviewing their own work and finding it acceptable, which was, for Walsh, the full range of the emotional spectrum. Sophia came in 20 minutes later. She looked at the system, looked at the team, and said, "Good work," which was, Nathan had learned, the highest standard unit of praise she regularly deployed. Then she looked at Nathan and said, "Monday. We need to rehearse the demonstration sequence." "I'll be here," he said. She nodded and left, because there were other things to manage, and there always were. The team began drifting away in ones and twos, the particular dispersal of people who'd been running hard and were allowing themselves, cautiously, to stop. Nathan stayed at the bench. He ran his hand along the frame of the prototype, not checking anything, just touching it. The way you put your hand on a car after you've finished a long repair, not for any functional reason, but because you worked on it, and it's done, and there's something to acknowledge in that. He thought about the morning in October. The broken curb, the motor whirring against the stuck wheel. He thought about 9 weeks of early mornings and late nights, and Lily eating cereal and asking if he'd be at pickup, and Walsh in an elevator at 11 p.m., and Carmen on a Saturday with numbers she'd run because she couldn't sleep. He thought about Sophia in the workshop that first night, running the prototype through the transition sequence and saying, "You just go through in that quiet, matter-of-fact way, like it was a small thing, when both of them knew it wasn't small at all." He took his hand off the frame. Torres was still there, pulling on his jacket. He looked at Nathan. "You think it's going to work, Dallas?" Nathan looked at the prototype one more time. "Yeah," he said. "I think it's going to work." Torres nodded, satisfied, and left. Nathan turned off his station light and got his bag and drove to pick up his daughter. The drive to Dallas took 3.5 hours on a Tuesday morning, and Nathan spent most of it in the passenger seat of the company van, watching the Texas landscape flatten out and thinking about all the ways a thing could go wrong. Not catastrophically wrong. Not the kind of wrong where the system failed publicly in front of the industry audience they needed to impress. He'd stress-tested that possibility enough times over the last 9 weeks that it had lost its power to frighten him. The system worked. They both knew it worked. And beyond a certain point of preparation, you had to trust the preparation. What occupied him on that drive was the smaller, more personal category of wrong, the kind where everything functioned exactly as designed, and it still didn't land the way it needed to. Where the room looked at what they'd built and saw something competent rather than something necessary. Where Meridian's remaining investors and the procurement directors and the rehabilitation center representatives in that audience walked away interested but not convinced. There was a version of this where the prototype was good enough and it wasn't enough. He'd been in the van for about an hour when Sophia, in the seat ahead of him, turned and looked back. "You're thinking loud," she said. "I didn't say anything." "That's what I mean." She turned back around. Carmen was driving. Walsh was in the back with his laptop open, running through the technical specification document for the third time that morning, which Nathan had stopped finding excessive and started finding reassuring somewhere around week 6 of the development cycle. Torres and Patel had driven up separately the day before to handle setup and system check at the convention center. Nathan looked out the window. The sky was that flat gray that Texas did in early March, not threatening rain, just withholding. He thought about Lily, who was at school right now, who had waved him off that morning with a piece of toast in one hand, and the unbothered confidence of a child who believed her father was going to do fine because she'd decided he was. He thought about what that belief cost her, the particular faith a kid places in a parent, and how you carry it. He thought about what Sophia had said the week before, during the last rehearsal. She'd done it. She'd agreed to run the demonstration herself, not announced it, just appeared at the Monday rehearsal in her everyday chair and said, "Walk me through the transfer sequence." And they'd rehearsed it 4 times until the mechanics of transitioning from her daily chair to the prototype and back were clean enough that neither of them had to think about the logistics during the actual event. She'd been businesslike about it, precise, no sentiment. But there was a moment during the 3rd rehearsal when she'd run the prototype through the full demonstration sequence, curb transition, surface variation, elevation assist, and Nathan had been watching from the side and he'd seen, for just a moment, the thing she usually kept entirely separate from the work. Not emotion exactly, more like recognition. The look of a person who knows the difference between solving a problem theoretically and having the solution in their hands. She'd caught him watching. She hadn't said anything. She'd run the sequence a 4th time. The Mobitech National Expo occupied 2 floors of a Dallas convention center and ran for 2 days. The first day was mostly technical presentations and industry panels, the kind of event architecture that created context and audience and the particular alertness of professionals who had been sitting through good enough presentations and were ready for something that justified their registration fee. Vertex was scheduled for the 2nd afternoon, the 2:30 slot on the main demonstration floor, which the expo coordinator had told Sophia was considered premium placement. Nathan spent the first day doing what he always did in unfamiliar environments, observing. He walked the floor, looked at what other companies were presenting, listened to how people in this industry talked about mobility technology. He sat in the back of 2 panel discussions and said nothing, just absorbed the vocabulary and the concerns and the particular anxieties of an industry that knew it was serving a population that didn't have the luxury of waiting for perfect. He saw Garrett Osei from Meridian Capital in the afternoon, moving through the floor with a small group. Osei caught his eye briefly and gave him the polite nod of a man who remembered the meeting but wasn't going to preemptively signal anything about tomorrow. Nathan nodded back and kept walking. At dinner that evening, the team at a restaurant 2 blocks from the hotel, the kind of place that materialized near convention centers for exactly this purpose. Walsh ordered a club soda and looked at the table and said, "The other demonstrators today. Nothing I saw changes my assessment of our competitive position." "That's Walsh for 'We're the best thing here,'" Torres told Nathan, not quietly. Walsh looked at Torres with the expression of a man who was deciding whether to address this. He decided not to. "The elevation assist differentiation is significant," he said. "If Park and the procurement people are paying attention, they'll see it." "They'll be paying attention," Carmen said. Sophia was at the end of the table, slightly separate from the main conversation, looking at something on her tablet. She'd been quieter than usual all day, which Nathan had come to understand was not anxiety, but concentration. The way she got when something was close, and she was holding every variable in her head simultaneously. He'd seen it in project crises, and he'd seen it before major stakeholder meetings, and he recognized it now for what it was, the state she operated in when the stakes were real. He reached across and took a piece of bread from the basket in front of her without asking. She looked up. "You should eat something," he said. She looked at the bread basket. Then she took a piece. "Thank you," she said, with the slight dryness she applied to things that were obvious. Torres looked at Patel. Patel looked at his menu. Carmen looked at nobody in particular and drank her water. The morning of the demonstration, Nathan woke at 5:30 in the hotel room and lay there for a while in the dark doing nothing, which was unusual for him. He normally moved fast in the mornings, the mechanical routine of a man who'd been getting a kid to school on time for years. But there was no school pickup today, and no bench to get to and nothing to do yet, and so he lay there and let himself be still for a few minutes, which he'd gotten bad at and knew it. He thought about the sidewalk in October, the broken curb, the way he'd pulled over without fully deciding to, the way the decision had already happened somewhere below conscious thought before he was aware of making it. He'd replayed that moment many times in the last 5 months, trying to understand what it was that had made him stop. Not the mechanics of the choice. He understood the mechanics. He'd always stopped for things like that. It was just who he was. He was trying to understand what it meant that the choice had cost him something real, and he'd made it anyway, and the cost had turned out to be not what he thought it was. He didn't have a clean answer. He suspected the clean answer was the wrong one. He got up and made coffee from the hotel machine, which was as bad as hotel machines always were, and drank it standing at the window looking at the Dallas skyline in the early gray light. His phone buzzed, a text from Lily. "Good luck today. Don't mess up." He smiled at it, texted back, "Thanks for the encouragement." Her response came immediately. "You're going to be great. Also, can we get a dog?" He put the phone in his pocket and finished the coffee. The convention center in the mid-morning had a different quality than the day before. More people, higher noise level, the specific frequency of an event on the day when things actually happened. Nathan and Torres ran a full system check on the prototype at 9 a.m., going through every component in sequence, not because they expected to find anything, but because not doing it was not an option. Everything checked out. Torres gave Nathan a look that was trying to be casual and wasn't quite. "It's fine," Nathan said. "I know it's fine," Torres said, in the tone of a person who knew it was fine and needed someone to say it out loud anyway. Walsh arrived at 10 and ran his own check, which Nathan had expected and made no comment about. Walsh ran his check, found nothing, and said, "We're good." And that was the end of it. At noon, Sophia appeared in the demonstration prep area. She was in her daily chair, dressed for the presentation in a way that was professional without being overdressed. Dark jacket, clean lines, the same composed readiness she brought to every stakeholder situation. She looked at the prototype, looked at Nathan, and said, "How is it?" "Clean," he said. "Walsh ran it at 10, system solid." She nodded. She came to the edge of the prototype and looked at it for a moment, then looked at Nathan again. "If something goes wrong during the demonstration, it won't. If it does, we handle it," he said. "We've been handling things for 9 weeks. We can handle one more thing." She looked at him for a moment with that measuring quality, the one he'd stopped finding unnerving sometime around month 2 and had started finding, if he was going to be honest with himself, something closer to the opposite of unnerving. Then she nodded. 2:30, she said. "We'll be ready," he said. The main demonstration floor was fuller than either of them had expected. Nathan found out later that word had moved through the expo floor that morning, partly from the prior day's networking, partly because Walsh's assessment of their competitive position had apparently been shared in one form or another among people who paid attention to these things. Whatever the reason, the 2:30 slot had drawn more than the standard demonstration audience. The chairs were full, and there were people standing along the side walls, and Nathan, standing at the edge of the setup area, counted the faces and recognized several of them from the morning's floor panels. Lisa Park was in the 3rd row. Garrett Osei was 2 seats from her. Between them and slightly behind was a man Nathan didn't recognize, who Carmen, appearing at his shoulder, told him was the director of rehabilitation technology procurement for a major hospital network that operated facilities in 8 states. "No pressure," Torres said from his other side. "Shut up, Torres," Carmen said, not unkindly. Nathan looked at the prototype, positioned at the center of the demo floor, under the lighting that Torres and Patel had adjusted that morning. He'd never been good at aesthetic assessments. That wasn't his skill set. It looked like what it was. A serious piece of engineering. Not glossy, not performed. The real thing. He thought, good. At 2:28, Sophia came from the prep area and positioned herself beside him. She was looking at the audience, doing her own version of the same calculation he'd been doing. "Full room," he said. "Yes." How do you feel? She was quiet for a moment. Like I've been waiting a long time for this. She paused. You? He thought about the right answer and then said the true one instead. Nervous. She looked at him sideways, surprised slightly. You're always the steady one. I'm steady when I'm working, he said. Standing here watching is different. She held his gaze for a moment. You built the thing that works, she said. That part's done. Now we just have to show it. Then she moved to the center of the floor. He watched her the way he'd watched her that first night in the workshop, running the prototype through the transition sequence for the first time. The way you watch something when you know it well enough to see every decision it's making in real time. She opened without slides, without a video package, without any of the standard expo presentation architecture. She just started talking, in the direct, unpretentious way she talked when she wasn't performing for a room, and the room, he could see it, felt the difference and went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. She talked about the problem, not abstractly, specifically. The broken curb cut, the stuck wheel, the daily arithmetic of navigating a world that was designed to passable standards rather than real ones. She said the word daily the way someone says a word they've lived inside, not the way someone says a word they've researched. The room understood the difference. Then she said, I want to show you what we built. She turned the chair and moved to the prototype. Nathan had watched the transfer sequence 4 times in rehearsal, and he watched it now, and it was the same, clean, practiced, no ceremony. She settled into the prototype seating system, adjusted her position once, and activated the drive. The room watched. She ran it through the demonstration sequence the same way she'd run it in the Austin workshop in December, forward across the floor to the simulated curb transition that Torres and Patel had constructed at the far end of the demo area, through it once, back through it, into the surface variation sequence. The system ran quiet. The transition was clean. The elevation assist moved through its range without hesitation, without the slight mechanical resistance that had been in every previous system Nathan had encountered. She brought it back to center and stopped. This is the transition mechanism, she said, and she described it the way Nathan had described it to her the first time, without the formal engineering vocabulary, just in the plain language of what it did and why it mattered. She talked about the load geometry and the curb surfaces and the 43 photographs of Austin's sidewalks. She didn't look at Nathan when she said that last part, but he felt Carmen glance at him and he kept his eyes on the floor. Then Sophia said something he hadn't heard her say in any rehearsal. I have been using a wheelchair for 8 years, she said. The room was very quiet. I have been using this system for 11 days. In those 11 days, I have not braced for a single curb transition. She paused. If you've never had to brace for something that most people don't notice, that may not land for you as a significant statement. Another pause. It is. The room stayed quiet for a moment after she finished. Not the polite quiet before applause. The different kind. The kind where something real has just been said and the audience is processing it before they know how to respond. Then the applause started, and it was not polite. Lisa Park found Nathan during the post-demonstration reception, which was held in an adjacent space and had the energized quality of a room where things had gone better than expected. The anchor geometry, she said. She had a glass of water and the focused expression of someone who had been thinking about a specific thing since 2:30 and was ready to talk about it. I read the technical documentation, the adaptation from automotive suspension principles. Whose idea was that? Mine, he said. She looked at him. Walk me through it. He did. He gave her the full version, the original load model gap, the surface photographs, the way the problem had mapped onto an automotive parallel he'd worked with for years. She asked 3 technical questions, and he answered all 3. She asked a 4th that he had to think about for a moment before answering, and when he answered it, she nodded with the expression of someone whose assessment had been confirmed. Automotive background, no formal engineering degree, she said. Not a challenge. More like she was saying it to herself. That's right. And you've been at Vertex 5 months. She looked at him for a moment. The scalability, she said. Vehicle entry systems. You mentioned it in the stakeholder meeting in December. How developed is that thinking? It's early. The principle is sound. We'd need a dedicated design phase. What would that require? He looked at her. He was aware this was a different kind of conversation than it had started as. That's a question for Sophia, he said. but I can tell you what it would require from the engineering side, if that's useful." "Yes," Park said. "It is." They talked for 20 minutes. Walsh found them at some point and joined without invitation, which under other circumstances Nathan might have found irritating, but in this case he was relieved because Walsh had the full technical fluency that Nathan was still assembling, and they complemented each other in the conversation in the same way they'd started complimenting each other in the workshop. Park asked Walsh a question, and Walsh answered it with the precision that was his primary gift, and then Nathan followed with the practical implication, and Park looked between them with the expression of someone seeing something work the way it was supposed to. Garrett Osei appeared beside Sophia on the other side of the room. Nathan watched their conversation from a distance, couldn't hear it, couldn't read it clearly, but the body language was different from the stakeholder meetings, less managed, more direct. He found out what it meant an hour later. Sophia found him near the door when the reception was thinning out. She looked different than she had at 2:28. The concentrated pre-demonstration stillness had released into something more human, more tired, more present. "Osei," she said. "Yeah?" "Meridian is restoring the full funding commitment." She said it the way she said things that were significant. Flat, direct, letting the fact carry the weight without dressing it up. "They want to move to a formal partnership for the vehicle entry application." He looked at her. "The full commitment." "And then some." She paused. "The hospital network director. His name is Weston. He wants to talk about a procurement pilot. 6 facilities, initial rollout, if the field testing data holds." Nathan stood there with that for a moment. He thought about what it meant, not abstractly, but in the specific human terms of the people who would use what they'd built. The daily arithmetic of navigating a world designed to passable standards. The particular small violence of bracing for something most people didn't notice. "That's what it was for," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." They stood for a moment in the quiet at the edge of the emptying reception room. Most of the team was visible. Torres and Patel near the prototype that was being prepared for transport, Carmen talking to someone Nathan didn't recognize, Walsh with his jacket finally on and looking like a man who was permitting himself to be done for the day. "I want to say something," Sophia said, "and I want to say it right, so I'm going to say it carefully." He waited. "You pulled over on a sidewalk in October because a stranger's chair was stuck and you couldn't drive past it," she said. "You could have. Any reasonable calculation of your own interests said to drive past it." She looked at him steadily. "I have spent 2 years building this company. I have 112 employees and 4 product lines and a patent portfolio and a board I answer to. And the thing that is going to make this technology real, the thing that is going to get it to the people who need it, started with the fact that you couldn't drive past something that needed fixing." She paused. "I don't think that's an accident," she said. "I think the people who can't drive past things that need fixing are the same people who are worth building things with. And I wanted to tell you that directly." He looked at her for a moment. He thought about all the things he could say. The modest deflection, the shared credit version, the professional acknowledgement. He set them all aside. "I didn't stop for a reason," he said. "I stopped because I couldn't not. There's a difference." "I know," she said. "That's the part I'm talking about." They stood there for a moment, the distance between them the comfortable distance of 2 people who had been working side by side for 5 months and had arrived, without either of them formally acknowledging it, at something more than that. "There's a conversation we should probably have," Nathan said. "Not tonight." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "Not tonight." A beat. "But not never." "No," he said. "Not never." Walsh appeared beside them with his bag on his shoulder and said without preamble, "The van leaves at 6. I'd like to be home before 9. He looked between them with the expression of a man who had registered the nature of the moment and was declining to engage with it. "Good demonstration," he told Sophia. To Nathan, the park conversation was productive. Then he went to find Carmen. Nathan watched him go. "He's not as oblivious as he pretends," he said. "No," Sophia said. "He isn't." The corner of her mouth moved. "Come on. Let's go find out if Torres has already taken the prototype apart." Boto. He called Lily from the van on the way home, somewhere south of Waco, where the landscape had gone dark, and the highway was a straight line of lights heading toward Austin. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been near the phone. How'd it go? Really well, he said. A pause. Like, really well or adult really well, which is just fine. Really well, he said. The demonstration worked. The investors are back in. A hospital network wants to do a pilot. He heard her processing this. So the chairs are going to actually get made? Looks like it. A longer pause. And you helped make them? Me and a lot of other people, yeah. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the background sound of the apartment, the TV on in the living room, which meant Marco had come over to keep her company, which he'd asked Marco to do, and Marco had done without a production about it. Dad, Lily said. Yeah. I told Ms. Hendricks about your job, like what you actually do. A pause. She said it sounded really important. He looked out the van window at the dark Texas highway. It is, he said. It really is. Cool. And then, Marco made me eat broccoli. Good. It was not good. I'll be home by 9, he said. Don't stay up. I'm going to stay up. I know, he said. I'll be home by 9. Sat. He got home at 8:52. Lily was on the couch with a blanket over her legs, technically watching television, technically not asleep, doing the specific 8-year-old version of honoring the spirit of a bedtime without honoring the letter. Marco was in the kitchen doing dishes, which Nathan had not asked him to do, and appreciated more than he said. Lily looked up when he came in. You said 9. It's 8:52. That's almost 9. It's 8 minutes from 9. She considered this, then shifted to make room on the couch. He sat down and she leaned against his arm with the full comfortable weight of a kid who had decided this was where she was going to be, and that was the end of the discussion. Tell me, she said. So he told her. Not the engineering details, not the investor dynamics, not the specifics of the demonstration. He told her about the room going quiet when Sophia talked about bracing for curb transitions. He told her about Lisa Park and the 20-minute conversation about suspension principles. He told her about Osei restoring the funding and Weston and the hospital pilot. He told her that the thing they'd built was going to be used by real people in real places, and that real people's days were going to be different because of it. Easier in a small, specific way that wasn't small at all, once you understood what it cost to go through a day without it. Lily listened to all of this with the serious attention she gave to things that mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Because you stopped to fix the wheelchair. That's where it started, yeah. And if you hadn't stopped, you would have been on time to the interview. Probably. And then you would have gotten a regular job. Maybe. Or maybe not. I might not have gotten it. I don't know. She thought about this. So the thing that seemed bad was actually the thing that made the good thing happen. Yeah, he said. Something like that. She was quiet again. Outside the apartment window, Austin was doing its usual nighttime thing, the low, persistent noise of a city that never fully stopped. The water stain on the bedroom ceiling was invisible from here. I think, Lily said with the deliberate pacing of a person who was working something out as she spoke, that most people would have kept driving. Some would have stopped, he said, but most would have kept driving, because they had somewhere important to be. She paused. And you stopped anyway. He didn't say anything. Why? She asked. Not philosophically, just directly, the way she asked things, the way she'd always asked things, the way that never let him off with a half answer. He thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. Because some things you can see need doing, he said, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. And at that point, driving past is its own decision. It's not neutral. You're choosing to leave it. He paused. I didn't want to choose to leave it. She sat with that for a moment. I want to be like that, she said. He looked at her. The side of her face, the dark eyes that were his eyes in her mother's face, the 8-year-old person who had put a blanket over him when he fell asleep on the couch, and asked if they could have tacos and eaten broccoli because Marco said to, and asked the question that went straight to the bone every single time. You already are, he said. She leaned harder against his arm, which was her version of accepting that, and they sat there watching television that neither of them was really watching, while Austin made its noise outside, and Marco finished the dishes, and the night got late in the good way, that night sometimes got late, when there was nowhere you needed to be, and the people who mattered were where you could hear them. In the weeks that followed, things changed in the way that real changes happen. Not all at once, not announced, just gradually different than they were before, until the before version was hard to fully remember. The Meridian partnership formalized in April. Weston's hospital pilot was confirmed for 6 facilities with a 12-month evaluation period, the kind of real-world field deployment that would generate the data that every subsequent decision would be built on. Nathan found himself in procurement meetings and field coordinator calls and the administrative machinery of a product moving from development into the world, which was a register of work he'd never done before, and was learning fast and imperfectly and with the same basic approach he'd applied to everything since he was 19. Pay attention. Don't pretend to know what you don't know, and trust that the problem is solvable if you stay patient with it. Walsh told him, in the understated way Walsh told him things, that the scalable anchor geometry application he'd developed was being filed in the patent process under joint attribution. Nathan had not known this was coming. He'd sat with it for a moment in Walsh's office, looking at the document, and then said, "You didn't have to do that." "You did the work," Walsh said. "We both did the work." "Then the attribution is correct." Walsh picked up his pen. "Is there anything else?" There wasn't. Carmen was promoted to lead systems architect in May, which she accepted with the characteristic efficiency of a person who had seen it coming and had already made the mental preparations. She told Nathan about it at the bench, where they both still spent most of their mornings, and then immediately asked him where he was on the vehicle entry application preliminary specs. He told her. She had comments. They worked through them. Torres stopped stress eating from the vending machine sometime in March, which Nathan attributed to the fact that Torres's design instincts had gotten sharper, and he was encountering fewer problems that didn't have a path forward. It was possible that wasn't the reason. It was the one that made sense. And Sophia. The conversation Nathan had said they needed to have happened on a Thursday evening in April. Not planned, not set up, just the natural arrival of a thing that had been accumulating for months. They'd been the last 2 in the workspace. This had happened before. It wasn't unusual. And she'd been at her drafting table, and he'd been at his bench, and the building had gone quiet around them. And at some point he'd walked to her table and leaned against it and said, "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway," she said. "That's fair." He looked at the drafting table, then at her. "What do you want? Not for the company, for yourself." She looked at him for a moment with that measuring quality that he'd long since stopped finding anything other than entirely honest. "I want to keep building things that matter," she said. "I want to not lose track of why, the way I almost did." She paused. "I want—" She stopped. "Yeah?" he said. "I want to stop eating dinner alone at my desk 3 nights a week," she said, "which has been the reality of my life for about 18 months, and which I have gotten used to in a way that is probably not healthy." He looked at her. "That last part I can help with," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I said it." It was not a declaration. It was not a dramatic moment in the way those moments were supposed to happen. It was 2 people who had been honest with each other for 5 months deciding to keep being honest with each other about something they'd both been circling for a while. It was imperfect and slightly awkward, and both of them were tired, and neither of them had any idea how all the logistics of it would work. It was real, which was the thing that mattered. Passé. Nathan thought about all of it on a morning in May, sitting on the back step of the apartment while Lily ate breakfast inside and the Austin morning did its slow warm-up toward another hot day. He thought about the October sidewalk and the broken curb and the press shirt hanging on the bathroom door. He thought about the yellow legal pad with 37 interview questions that he'd never used. He thought about what it was that had made him pull over. He still didn't have a clean answer, and he'd come to believe that was the right condition for it. Clean answers to those questions were usually someone retrofitting meaning onto something that was simpler and more honest than meaning. He'd pulled over because he couldn't not, and the rest had followed from that, and the rest was a life. There was a version of himself that had kept driving. He'd thought about that version a lot in the early weeks, the way you think about a choice you didn't make, running the alternate path. That version had a different job, probably. A better job than the shop, maybe. A fine job. A life that moved forward by the ordinary increments of a man doing the right things in the right order. He didn't think about that version much anymore. Not because this version was easier or cleaner or resolved into something that didn't require daily effort. His daughter still asked questions that went straight to the bone. He was still learning things he should have known years ago. He was still tired in the evenings in ways that sleep didn't entirely fix. The math of a life was still math, but something had happened on that sidewalk that he hadn't planned and couldn't have engineered, and it had happened because he was the person he was, the person who couldn't drive past something that needed fixing. And that person had turned out to matter in ways he hadn't known to want. He thought about what Lily had said on the couch that night. I want to be like that. He told her she already was. He'd meant it the way you mean things when you know them to be true before you can explain why. And sitting on the back step in the May morning with the coffee going cold in his hand, he thought about it again. And he thought, that's the whole thing. Not the technology, not the funding, not the demonstrations and the patents and the hospital pilots. The whole thing was that 8-year-old on the couch with a blanket over her legs, watching him come through the door at 8:52, already carrying the instinct to stop for what needed stopping. You couldn't engineer that. You couldn't develop it through a formal process or test it in a lab or document it in a specification. You could only be it and hope the people near you saw it and let them carry it forward in their own way. That was the work that didn't end. That was the project with no deadline and no expo and no investor approval. He finished the coffee and went inside because Lily was going to be late and someone had to say so. You're going to be late, he said. I know. She was already putting on her shoes, which she'd known she needed to do before he said it. Can we have tacos tonight? We can have tacos tonight, he said. She grabbed her backpack. He grabbed his keys. They went out into the May morning together, and the city was already warm and loud and indifferent and full of things that needed fixing, which was the same as it always was, which was fine. It had always been fine.